Welcome to the I Choose Today podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about perseverance. We talked about how we need to keep walking, even when things feel uncertain. And last week, we talked about trusting in the waiting. And today, I want to talk to you about something that often comes up with perseverance. That is weariness. Because if we're being honest, perseverance can be exhausting. Not always physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally. Sometimes we grow weary. Sometimes we get tired of waiting. Sometimes we get tired of hoping. Sometimes we get tired of trying. And I think it's important to say this. Weariness is not failure. Weariness is human. Even Scripture acknowledges this. Paul talks about not losing heart. Even though outwardly we may feel worn down, inwardly we are being renewed day by day. I love that picture because it acknowledges something we all experience. There are times when we feel depleted. Times we feel like we don't have much left. Times when we feel in ways that rest alone doesn't fix. Times when we feel tired in ways that rest alone doesn't fix. But even in those moments, God is still working. Even when we feel worn down, God is still renewing us. And sometimes that renewal doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it comes slowly, quietly, day by day. I think sometimes we assume perseverance means pushing harder. But sometimes perseverance looks like standing even when you feel tired. Sometimes perseverance looks like showing up, even when you don't feel strong. Sometimes perseverance looks like trusting God when you don't have much left. Isaiah talked about God giving strength to the weary and increasing the power of the weak. I love that because it reminds us that God meets us in our weakness. He doesn't expect us to be strong all the time. He strengthens us when we're not. I think that's important because sometimes we feel pressure to always have it together, to always be strong, to always feel confident. But that's not reality. There are seasons when we feel worn down. There are seasons when we feel discouraged, seasons when we feel tired. And perseverance means continuing, even in those moments. I think about Elijah. After a great victory, he found himself exhausted, discouraged, and overwhelmed. He had just experienced something incredible, and yet he was weary. He was afraid. He was discouraged. And he felt alone. And what did God do? Well, God didn't rebuke him. God met him. He allowed him to rest. He provided food. He gave him time. And then God strengthened him for the next step. I think that's such a beautiful picture of how God meets us in our weariness. He doesn't demand strength from us. He gives strength to us. Psalms 23 talks about God restoring our souls. I just love that imagery because restoration implies something was depleted, something was worn down, something needed to be renewed. And I think perseverance often includes seasons where we need restoration, where we need to slow down, where we need to sit in God's presence, where we allow Him to renew our strength. Because perseverance is not about running ourselves into the ground. It's about continuing to walk with God, even when we feel weary. And I think sometimes weariness shows up in quiet ways. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes weariness looks like discouragement. Sometimes it looks like losing motivation. Sometimes it looks like feeling emotionally drained. And sometimes it looks like questioning whether what you're doing even matters. And I think we've all experienced those moments. Moments where we feel tired. Moments when we feel discouraged. Moments where we feel like giving up. But perseverance means continuing, even then. It means bringing our weariness to God. It means allowing Him to meet us there. Because He doesn't expect us to carry everything on our own. Jesus invites those who are weary and burdened to come to Him. And the invitation still stands. An invitation to rest. Not just physical rest, but deep soul rest. Peace. Renewal. Strength. And perseverance often comes from that place. From resting in God. From being renewed by Him. From allowing Him to strengthen us. There have been seasons in my life where I have felt worn down, where I didn't feel strong, where I didn't feel like I had much left. But it was in those seasons God met me. He strengthened me. He renewed me. Not all at once, but day by day. And I think that's how perseverance often looks. Not sudden strength, but daily renewal. God meeting us in our weakness. God strengthening us one step at a time. And I think sometimes we need to give ourselves permission to acknowledge weariness, to bring it to God and say, Lord, I'm tired. Because He already knows. And He invites us to come to Him. And I think sometimes weariness comes in seasons where we've been faithful for a long time, where we've been showing up, where we've been trusting, where we've been doing what we know God has asked us to do. And yet, we're still tired. Because perseverance over time can be draining. Not because we don't love God, not because we don't trust Him, but because we're human. And I think sometimes we assume that if we're walking closely with God, we shouldn't feel weary. But even Jesus experienced weariness. He withdrew to quiet places. He rested. He stepped away from the crowds, not because he lacked faith, but because he lived within human limits. And I think that's important for us to remember. Because perseverance doesn't mean ignoring our limits. It means trusting God within them. And I think there's an important distinction here. Perseverance is not the same as burnout. Perseverance is walking with God. Burnout is often walking without resting in Him. Perseverance includes renewal. Burnout ignores it. Perseverance keeps us anchored. Burnout leaves us depleted. And sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is slow down long enough for God to renew us. Because perseverance isn't about pushing until we break. It's about continuing to walk with God at a sustainable pace. And I think that's what we all need to hear. Because sometimes we assume perseverance means pushing harder. But sometimes perseverance means resting in God and allowing Him to strengthen us for the journey ahead. And honestly, this is where I find myself right now. In a season where I am weary, where I am tired, but I'm still showing up, still trusting, still walking, still doing what I know God has asked me to do. And I think that's important to say because sometimes we assume that perseverance looks strong, but sometimes perseverance looks quiet. Sometimes perseverance looks like continuing to show up even when you're tired. And I think many of us find ourselves in seasons like that, not in crisis, not in defeat, just weary. If that's where you are today, I want you to know that you're not alone. Because perseverance isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply continuing to walk with God one step at a time. So if you're feeling weary today, I want to encourage you. You're not failing. You're human. Bring your weariness to God. Let Him renew your strength. Because perseverance doesn't mean you never feel tired. It means you keep standing, even when you are. If you're feeling weary today, take a few moments to sit quietly with God. Tell Him how you're feeling. Ask Him to renew your strength. And allow Him to meet you right where you are. Because perseverance sometimes looks like standing strong, and sometimes it looks like resting in God while He strengthens you. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, you can always choose today.